Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production and studio provided by MaxLux Media, sponsored by Dorada Nutrition, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to fostering quality dialogue surrounding all things local policy related in North County, San Diego. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. Well, I hope everyone's staying cool on this Wednesday in August now. Is it August 1st? August 2nd? So basically, I wanted to do this episode. This is Rachel Crawford. She's the host of the Holistic Interior Design Business Podcast. But I want to do this episode because every now and then we like to, in addition to the interviews with politicians, athletes, etc., showcase people that are doing great local work, people that are making a artistic, aesthetic contribution to our community. And Rachel was somebody's name came up, and I wanted to bring you on, and you can talk about your own podcast and also some of the work you do for interior design. So, as I mentioned, she is the host of the Holistic Interior Design Business Podcast. She is a holistic interior designer, a mystic, a Reiki master, tarot reader, a feng shui practitioner, and an energy healer. She hosts workshops and retreats. And you do a lot. You have a lot of experience with working not just interior design, but you've been showcased in various exhibitions, including Kaboo, a prestigious music, comedy, and culinary art festival in Del Mar. Mm-hmm. Your designs have been featured in publications such as the San Diego Home Garden Lifestyles, Modern Luxury Magazine, the Exquisite Weddings magazine, the Style and Decor, and Serendipity magazine.
Yeah, correct.
So I wanted to bring you in and give you a chance to talk about some of the work you've been doing, collaborating with other artists, some of the work you've been doing locally, sort of some of the inspiration and thought process that goes into your work. I'm talking about your work with groups, with individuals. So first of all, can you tell us a bit about the podcast itself, sort of what you try to exhibit in the podcast, sort of what you draw attention to, and sort of what was the inspiration for that?
Absolutely. So I started the podcast in 2022 at the very beginning of the year. I was really inspired by other people just talking about their podcasts and what they're doing. And I just remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't want to create a podcast. I don't want to create a thing. I'm a very manifesting, creating person. So I just felt like it was an overwhelming, daunting task. And then I realized that there's people that can produce your podcast for you. So then I was like, okay, I could do it. And the idea behind the podcast initially was to really support future clients, homeowners, with creating sacred spaces within their home, being really intentional about the space that they're creating, especially since the pandemic. People are getting really intentional about the aesthetics, but also the energetics of it, the wellness in our homes, the non-toxic influence that our environments have on our spirits. So that was the initial inspiration, was to share like feng shui tips and things that people can do on their own. And then I started getting invitations to talk at San Diego State to the interior design program. And because I was incorporating all this holistic influence into my design process and having my own business for quite a while, to just share with these students what I was doing, because it was so different from what they were being taught in school or examples that they were getting, just to kind of open their eyes, give them inspiration that you can create like a design business that's really suited with your own personal interests and with you as a person. So after that, students just kept coming up to me wanting to do mentorships and internships and all these things. And I was just being overwhelmed by all of them and was like, well, there's got to be like a place to send them to get this information. And I just wasn't finding any programs. So then I created the Design Coven, which is a bridge between interior design school and real life interior design. So the podcast then rebranded, evolved to really support those up and coming designers. So now the podcast is really geared on like business practices that I'm doing. I'll bring on guests that might focus on LinkedIn or social media or marketing or just like how to run a business in general. We have accountants that come on. And then I also share my own personal practices and what I'm doing. And then we also bring on artists. And that to me is a really special piece, because I'm really connected with the San Diego art scene and wanting to support that ecosystem of supporting local artists with interior designers. There wasn't that bridge either. A lot of designers don't even know like the local artists that are here, or know what galleries are opening, or what museums are happening, or just anything about the art world. And we have such an influence to bring on local art, original art into homes and to connect them with our clients. So it's kind of this whole sort of ecosystem that's going on.
Absolutely. How many episodes are you in? How long have you been doing this for?
We just launched episode 120, or 121 on Tuesday. Today's Tuesday? No, today's Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yesterday, 121 yesterday.
All right.
And it launched in March of 2022.
Okay. And you mentioned that, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but one thing I wanted to bring up is that during the pandemic, your work sort of evolved a bit. So you were collaborating with artist Carly Ely, creating the Unseen Portals project, offering monthly ritual boxes, mystical tools, including a forthcoming oracle deck. Can you talk to us a bit about how the pandemic sort of inspired that project and sort of how that relates to your podcast?
Yeah. So in 2018, I created a workshop called Bewitching the Home. And that was all about creating sacred space within our homes, I taught people how to do space clearings where we do energetic clearings of energy in homes from past residences or illness or death or whatever it was. And then I also taught feng shui and all these things. So when the pandemic happened, it was kind of like, oh, I need to bring that workshop back. So I created, it was like a 6-week course, teaching all of those sorts of things, being intentional with our homes, because I knew right when lockdown happened was that our houses and our spaces are so impactful on our spirit, our mind, like our mental health. So I wanted to create something to support people that were going through this, event that was happening. And of course, we didn't know how long it was happening for. So I got the idea of creating these ritual kits where I would hand make beeswax candles, infuse them with essential oils depending on the moon. So we really looked at the moon and the cycle that the moon was in and the sign that the moon was in. And then I put together crystals and tarot cards, and it was just a kit for people to be really intentional. And then I'm really good friends with Carly Ely, a local artist here in San Diego. And she and I have connected on the spiritual element for quite a while. And I wanted her to create art that was going to support the boxes. So we would create a bandana that was inspired by that sign. So she did the art, and then I had a local screen printer print the bandanas for me. I sewed all of them, and we would put them in boxes, and I would ship them out. Okay.
So can you tell me a bit let me put it this way, like for people who aren't familiar with the space that you work in.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about, in more detail, like what some of these things in the project look like oracle decks, like some of these, ritual boxes, those sorts of things. Like how do those specifics like kind of help create, healing and restoration for someone?
Yeah. So in my design process, if the client is interested, I don't do it for everybody. I do offer a space clearing, and that includes a reading, and that I'll bring in either tarot cards or oracle cards, and we get a reading from the house or even a reading from the client. So I'll pull cards to get more insight, more information about what they might need to know. Each one of the houses that I work with, I feel has just a natural spirit or like a guardian of the home. So I try to connect the homeowner with the house itself. So using these tools kind of opens up that space of intuition. It allows for a portal of connection energetically between the homeowner and the space that they're actually living in. So we'll use the oracle cards for that. I'll use crystals to set intentions. I've even put crystal grids in foundations of homes. So we did a house here in Leucadia, and before we poured the foundation, I created, on the floor plan, I got her intentions for the space. So she has an ADU, a main house, and then there's a pool house. So I really wanted to get her intentions for what she wanted to happen in that home, like how that house was going to support her and her family, who they were. And then I created a grid where basically we had crystals laid out into the foundation, corresponding with the Feng Shui Bagua map, which is a map that is ancient, thousands of years old. It corresponds to 9 different areas of our lives. So based on her intentions, the map itself, and the crystal meanings, I placed crystals into the foundation and had her write her intentions out with her own hand, placed those intentions under the main crystal and then kind of activated everything, and then they poured cement over all of it. So now all the intentions and the crystals are permanently encased into the foundation. So it just has a beautiful vibration that's set with her intentions throughout the house.
I'm curious, like during the pandemic, it was a time of profound stress and a profound, sort of mental crisis for society. Did you sort of observe, like in the space that you work in and, the clients that you work with, did you sort of observe like sort of changes in terms of people's openness and responses to spirituality and that sort of thing? Like what were some of the observations you made in terms of like the area that you work with?
I noticed people were coming to me really wanting the intention set with their homes. They were interested in receiving readings from me. I also am a Reiki master. So at times I'm actually offering Reiki services to my clients, either in a design session where I had one instance where we're actually shopping, client got off the call, the contractor was really distraught and just kind of freaking out about things. So in the middle of the showroom, I'm just like holding space for her and giving her a Reiki session to recenter her, get her back into her body, get her back focused. And then from that, we were able to move forward. Same thing with people's homes. Like people come to an interior designer, especially when they're going through transition. So moving into a new home, bringing in a new baby, getting a divorce, like all these things where they're going through these changes.
Yeah.
And so they'll request to have an energetic healing session or that kind of thing where we dive deeper into their mental space and spiritual space and design from there.
Sure. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about, there was something you said earlier where you're talking about basically one of the inspirations for the podcast, as I recall, was that you were working with students and you were discovering that sort of the work students were doing in design didn't always correspond to sort of your experience in the real world with design itself. Can you tell me a little bit about that sort of dissonance between sort of the academic process of design and sort of that real world implementation
Absolutely.
and how that sort of fed your podcast?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're in design school, you go through a class called business practices and you learn, okay, here's an invoice, this is a purchase order, this is blah, 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 blah. I mean, you see the forms, but you don't actually implement them. So, with the Design Coven, I also offer consultations with designers that are going into the business. So it's basically showing them how to run the business. So taking their hand and show them this is an invoice, this is how you do your pricing. They don't really teach you that either. There's so many different ways to price with interior design. So I share with them the different offerings and see what fits with them, share my personal experience of what works for me. And then show them how do you do an invoice. This is how you do your pricing. This is how you do your markups. This is how you do your procurement. This is a purchase order. And this, and then showing them how to open an account with a vendor and what does that mean. And then also setting up your actual business, getting your seller's permit and your business license and, getting liability insurance. Like it kind of gets glossed over and you read about it, but you don't know how it actually works in real life. So being able to give that to them. And then also, when you're in school, you learn about different, flooring or vendors or materials, but you don't actually go into like a showroom. So when you get out of school, going into a trade-only showroom can be very intimidating for somebody because, everyone's really polished looking, there's no pricing on anything, and you're coming in just super timid. So I introduce them to all my vendors, all my showrooms that are here in San Diego, which I've developed over 20 years of experience and just relationships. I'm a big relationship builder. So for me, it's like I will bring them in under my wing and introduce them to the owners of the business. This is how you open your account. This is where this is. We give them a whole tour so that when they do go in to shop for their client, they already have a connection through me. And all the owners and everyone that's here in San Diego are so open and supportive. And if they know that they're one of my members, they take extra care to make sure that they know what they're doing and support them.
Sure. And like what, as far as like going forward in the future, do you intend on doing sort of expanding the work that you do with students and sort of, bringing, younger people into the space that you work in?
Yeah, so I work with students and I also work with second career people. So those that have had a passion for design and went off to do a different career because financials, or they got married, or they had kids or whatever, and then they're coming back to design. But what I'm seeing in the future is I really want to create, right now our main chapter is here in San Diego. I do virtual events as well. So we've got members that are global. But the idea would be, and the in-person stuff is really only here in Southern California. So the idea is I would love to have other chapters in other cities throughout the world where people can learn and gather information like what I'm doing here in San Diego, having other designers being able to be those leaders for the people that are up and coming, to introduce them to those vendors that are in their cities, and also like with their local artists.
Sure. I realize this is sort of maybe should have been the first question, but just in terms of your overall approach to design, I mean, every designer is different, every person in your space is different, but you've talked about it a bit, some of the schools of thought that you work with, but can you kind of go into more detail in terms of your overall approach, your design philosophy when you're trying to create these spaces to work with, like sort of what traditions sort of feed into that? I mean, you've already mentioned a few, but can you kind of just explicate that for people who are unfamiliar with those traditions?
Yeah, so basically whenever a new client comes in, I'm really wanting to know what was the inspiration, what was the spark for wanting to connect with me or wanting to improve their space. So it always starts with an intention. So I'm wanting to know what's the intention, what are we using the space for, what's the idea behind the space, because that's really going to drive everything else. It's really about the form, the intention, and then from there I can now start to layer and gather, okay, if we're looking for a space that's going to be a retreat where somebody's going to use it for meditation, or they just need a space to kind of release and be distant from the world, then I'll know what color palette I should be looking at, what materials we might want to bring into the space, things that are a bit more cozy, that are soft, maybe not do so much metal. Metal has a very harsh energy to it. It's very industrial and masculine. And if we want to create a nurturing space, we might want to do something that's softer. So the intention is the biggest piece. I also like to know, what spaces make them happy. Are there restaurants that they love? Are there hotels that they love to go to? Are there stores? Are there brands that they really identify with? And I'm pulling that as well. And then, of course, if they have any inspiration photos, then I'll create a concept to present to them and get them on board. I'll create a floor plan, making sure that it's going to support all their needs. So knowing who's using the space, how many people are going to be in here at a time, what's the traffic flow for the space itself, what's the space being used for. That will really dictate my floor plan, making sure I have enough seating and the activities that they want to do in that space work well with what's happening. And then from there, I get their sign off on that, and then I'll start actually specifying exact parts and pieces. So picking the sofa, picking the rug. If they're really into sustainability, I'll look at those factors as well. That's a really big piece in interior design. There's so much waste that goes on with it. So if they're really looking at that piece, I'm looking at lines and vendors that are more in the sustainable realm, which is also those types of people that I try to bring on the podcast. I'm really conscious about who's coming on as a vendor, because I want to support those that are looking out after the planet, and ourselves as well, and looking at toxins that are going into the space. So that influences the specifications. I place all the orders, I schedule the deliveries, I file any claims that might happen, and then we do install. And and if they want, I'll do a space clearing where I'm clearing the energetics of the space.
Sure. So again, just talking about the sort of traditions that influence your designs and your approach, and just you as an artist, can you talk about how you incorporate some of these ancient practices and traditions into your designs? We've talked about feng shui, and you talked about the different crystals, for instance, that you put in the foundations of some of these spaces. Can you talk about the traditions that actually go into what you do as a designer?
Yeah, so I do practice feng shui, and I'm certified in classical feng shui, which is a really mathematical, technical aspect. I don't do too much of that. I do a lot of intention, and I'll use the Bagua map that helps with what the spaces are being used for. So if somebody really wants to focus in on, say, their love life, and they want to bring in a new partner, and we're designing their bedroom, then I'm going to set up that bedroom so that it allows for the energy of a new partner to come in. So I'm going to make sure that there's a space for this new partner. I'm going to make sure that the bed is nice and big and cozy, mostly a queen size. We try to stay away from something that's too big so that the partners aren't so far away apart. And we want to bring them closer. I'll put nightstands in the space, make a nightstand with a drawer that's empty. Same thing in the closet. We want to make room for a new partner to come in. So we're really intentional about leaving space for that. Art is huge. So I'm looking at art that's going into that bedroom. So the piece of art that's directly in front of your bed is one of the most important pieces. It's the first thing you see in the morning. It's the last thing you see at night. So I'm really intentional about what art is going in there. So if this is a single woman looking for a partner, I'm going to make sure that there aren't any single women pieces of art in there, because subconsciously it's just a running notion that
reinforcing your mentality.
You're reinforcing this. And then I'm putting things in pairs. Things are grouped together in there. I'm also working with crystals, so I might have some rose quartz that are coming into the bedroom, or any essential oils we might be placing in the space, if it's rose or ylang-ylang, or looking for aphrodisiac sort of essences that are coming into the space. So it's really setting the mood. And then I'm eliminating the television, taking out any exercise equipment, making sure that the bedroom just is really conducive for romance. So putting away all the dirty clothes and like having everything nice and neat.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because what I've noticed is that a lot of the successful people who, I know in my life, they like arrange their spaces very intentionally, in terms of, like photos on the wall, like, art, like it's just, there's so much, I think just like subconsciously you can already tell so much about someone from the moment you enter their space, but it's interesting that you've like sort of highlighted, like, depending on what frame of mind you're in, what posture in life, like how that comes into play and how that feeds into, what a person is trying to do in life, whether it's, procure a partner or, a new job or something.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to talk a bit about some of the other traditions, some of the other ancient practices that sort of feed into the work you do. Can you tell us a bit about, you talked about how you're a Reiki master, how you're a tarot reader. Can you talk a little bit about how, for people who aren't familiar with the history and tradition of design, sort of what some of these terms mean and sort of what that means for your work with clients?
Yeah, so Reiki is a light touch energy healing modality that I practice. I learned about it probably like 2014, 2015, as I was going off on my own. And for me, it was just a spiritual practice of reconnecting with myself and wanting to bring healing into my life. And tarot was just something that I also was very interested in from a young age. I still have my deck from when I was 17 that I use all the time. So I was really torn at one point of like having this very spiritual world that I was really influenced and just embraced by, and then interior design, and which really doesn't, in school there is no like real connection there. So I was torn between these two worlds, and then I realized through like feng shui that they intersect and they are so connected, and our environments are so impactful on our spirit. So for me, it was just about infusing all of that together and integrating it. It's not necessarily something that anyone might think to do, especially back when I was doing it or first starting it. Now it seems like people are more into it. They're getting it. It's almost expected to have this holistic approach to design.
Hey there, San Diego. If you're on the hunt for a way to enhance your health, I have a great recommendation for you. Dorado Nutrition is a company that's all about helping people live their best lives through top-notch American-made supplements. Their expert team has crafted products to support a variety of health needs, from weight management to muscle building and more. And with ingredients like Vidosia agrestis and Tonkat Ali, praised by a well-known neurobiologist seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, these supplements could be just what you need to reach your health goals. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your purchase by using promo code SD2023 at checkout. So if you're looking for a way to improve your health, Dorado Nutrition might just be the solution you need. Sure. Can you tell us a bit about so one thing I was interested in is I'm sure you work with clients from a lot of diverse backgrounds, like people with who come from different areas, people who have different life stories, people with different belief systems. How do you sort of work, because you kind of incorporate these traditional practices into your work. How do you sort of do that in a way that's conducive to clients with like a wide variety of backgrounds and beliefs and traditions?
Yeah, so like with the feng shui stuff, I'm always working in that zone no matter what, even if I don't tell the client specifically, especially when I'm like space planning and I'm selecting materials and I know what their intention is. So it doesn't have to, I don't have to hit them over the head like, this is what we're doing, it's feng shui. And some people kind of get weirded out by all of that stuff. So I'm just really careful and I can read the client pretty well. As far as how much I might share with them. But feng shui, for me, it's really about the energy flow and making sure that the home is supporting the people. So I'll use it in my floor plans and when I'm selecting materials. If the client wants to go down that road where they want to go more spiritual, then I might introduce crystals or I might introduce tarot. But I'm really conscious about how they want the design to be fed and how they want to work in that space. So I don't do space clearings with everybody. If they just really want a really conducive design for their home or their business or whatever, then I take it into that level. So I'm very flowy,
flexible, yeah.
And flexible. Yeah.
What would you say about your approach and like sort of the traditions that influence your work that differ from maybe other schools of thought, other traditions that are in the similar space?
Yeah, so just having like that background with feng shui and knowing how energy kind of intersects and how it all is connected, that's running. That's constantly running. So it's just through years of experience, it's just my natural inclination of how I design. Where an interior designer that might just come out of school is looking at things like, okay, I need to like make sure there's 36 inches for the hallway and I need to make sure the door's here. And, they're looking at things from a very mathematical or
analytical maybe?
Yeah, like approach, which you need that obviously, especially when you're doing commercial work. But I'm also looking at it on an energetic level, like how things are moving, like when do we need to do a round dining table or when should we take out, something that's more pointed, or looking at beams above and making sure they're not over you while you're sleeping, or if you're in your office, like making sure that you're on a wall that's solid so that you feel supported versus a window, or having a door behind your back and feeling that weirdness of like, is somebody coming in? And you can already feel that. I'm sure when I was, just talking to you about, you got that notion of, oh yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. So for me, it's just all these different layers that I'm playing with.
What and so I've brought on, we're in about episode, is this episode 40, guys? This is episode 40, and we've brought on, as I said, we've brought on the athletes, the politicians, the business owners. Everybody that I've brought on is a very driven person, and they're all inspired differently. They're all driven differently. Now your work is unique in terms of guests that we've brought on, and that your inspiration is sort of permeates your work itself in a sense. And I'm curious to know, we've already talked about some of the traditions that influence your work, but as far as just what inspires you personally, sort of what, like when you work in a space and when you curate that space to maximize it for your client, sort of some of the the inspiration and the drive that goes into that.
Yeah, so a lot of times I will ask, is there something that the client is inspired by? And then I take that and I run with it. So right now I'm designing the new space for Bivouac Cider Works here in San Diego. And for her, this new space was all about adventure and creating a space where she wants to host circles and healing spaces and co-working, and each one of those spaces has a different intention to it. So I've just taken the essence or the spirit of what she wants, and then I'm putting it into practical form. So I'm picking specific materials, specific color palettes, textures that implement that. And then the space plan as well, it has to make sure that it can operate in a way that we can have co-working during the day, we can have a wedding at night, we can create a women's circle in the middle for healing afterwards. So it's kind of just all I need is a little tidbit, and then I can take that and sort of run with it. And same thing with art. If somebody has a piece of art that they're in love with, the colors and all that, but also just getting the artist statement. What's the artist about? Because a lot of times we're connected to art on a subconscious level. So knowing like what was going on during that time, or even in the time that somebody selected that piece of art and what that made them feel. So a lot of it too is the feeling that they want to bring into the space. So if they want to create an office that makes them feel inspired and excited and motivated, then I'm going to pick up on that, and I'm going to design with those color palettes and textures and materials in mind.
Sure. Now I'm curious to know, like, this, because you work with, your work revolves around people, pouring into people's spaces, pouring into people on a personal, on a, even I'd say a spiritual level. Like for yourself, you, from what I can tell, you seem like a remarkably composed and motivated person. Like what is it about your work that allows you to also sort of stay grounded personally, that sort of, you're pouring out all the time, you're kind of putting into people. Like for you, like sort of what drives you personally, and sort of what keeps you grounded, what keeps you energized, as it were?
Yeah, that's the hardest part, is like creating that balance, because I'm the kind of person that just wants to give. And that's how I get myself into trouble, is I will overextend myself and overgive until I completely burn out. And then at that point, it's like, I'm like, okay, I got to get back. So for me to get centered again, to get reconnected, I live by the water, I go to the water, I take walks. I reconnect with my meditation practice. I'll pull tarot cards for myself. I also receive grounding by giving back. So I also have a group where I teach people about tarot. So I'll meet with them once a month, or I'll create a ceremony or a ritual where I'm, holding space for myself, but again, with others. But that is like the hardest part, because I get so motivated and inspired. Same thing with like the podcast. Like it literally came to me that I was going to do the podcast it was like January 6th of 2022. And then it was like, I had the idea, I had everything already created within like a week. I knew what it was happening. And we recorded, I don't even know how many episodes before we even launched. It was just like, I'm so driven. And if I know what I want, I can see it very clearly. And then I kind of just dive into it and make it happen. Same thing with the membership. It was like, I started doing those talks, or the idea, at the end of April, and I launched it the beginning of June. So it's just like an innate sort of drive that just happens.
Yeah. What are some of the maybe like disciplines or practices that you've implemented that kind of sort of allow you to stay disciplined and focused in a manner that's conducive to the work you do? So like, I would guess, although I don't know if you've said it explicitly so far, that meditation is something that goes into that. What are some of maybe talk about that, and maybe some of the other practices that for you personally you have found to be conducive to success?
Yeah, so for me, like those walks that I had mentioned, like really doing that, I get centered and grounded by listening to other podcasts or reading books or listening to books, mostly listening to books because I drive so much. And that to me helps me kind of recenter, and it helps me know that even though I've got this crazy like drive and ambition, that's totally normal for maybe a serial entrepreneur or somebody that wants to keep creating. So for me, that's kind of a peace of mind. But other times I might just drive without anything going on. So just creating space for just emptiness so that I can kind of sit with my own thoughts and kind of figure things out. I also love baths, or like I said, going to the water. That too is really healing. Even just putting my feet into the water, the salt water itself is very detoxifying, but also just to have that empty space of water, to feel that feeling of expansion, and also the feeling of feeling small, which is really cool.
Yeah. Do you, I'm curious in terms of, for people who, hear about like meditation, these other kinds of disciplines that you've talked about, for somebody who's like maybe considering implementing some of those things into their own life, but isn't really sure where to start, or maybe, they come from a belief system where those things are like, oh, that doesn't work, or that's like contrary to what I believe. But like, from what I gather, and from what I've learned, it seems as though it's a pretty you don't have to have a specific school of thought or a specific, religion or a belief system to buy into some of these things. It seems like pretty conducive to diverse background. Can you sort of talk about how someone would get started in that vein of thought?
Yeah, I think you can just start in your living room. You can start by walking around the block, just getting quiet. You can do it in your car, just kind of recentering yourself, connecting back to your breath. I'm a Reiki master, so I use my hands for healing, and everyone has that innately within them. If you think about when you're a little kid and you scuffed up your knee and your mom comes over and she puts her hand on your knee or she gives you a kiss, that's like creating a space of intention and infusing your aura with this healing energy. So even if you just like put your hands on your heart and just gave yourself some grace and some compassion and just a moment of rest to just like honor who you are, that starts there. If there's a certain place in nature that you like to go to, I love to invite people to go to the water, go to the woods, go take a hike, go do any of those things where they feel connected to Earth, because Earth is so healing and she's always been there and it's a great place to ground. The other thing I'll do is like just envision like the day and the chaos and all the things that happen, just kind of taking all that energy and just going through your feet, standing on, bare grass, and just letting Mother Nature take that energy and letting her transform it into something beautiful and healing. You can always, look up meditation spaces, people that do yoga. My friend Lindsay Harris has a hypnosis breathwork place in Kensington called The Deep Space. I do that a lot. I'll go to her for hypnosis. I'll go to her for sound baths. I also do singing bowls. But you can go to people that hold space for that if you feel like you need more guidance or you feel like you don't know, what to do. And you can always go online and just look up guided meditations. There's so many apps for that.
Yeah. And one thing that I've been thinking about is like, although, as you mentioned, a lot of people sort of started turning to, you notice sort of an uptick in people's like attentiveness to spirituality during the pandemic. And, there's certainly a school of thought where it's like, okay, you had the New Age movement that's sort of in the 80s that sort of like drove this resurgence in, attentiveness to spirituality. But this is not, these aren't new practices. These are very ancient practices that go back thousands of years. Can you sort of tell us a little about it, just briefly? I know it's hard to do in this space, but briefly a bit about the history of some of the traditions that like influence the work that you do directly.
Yeah, so like feng shui, there's a lot of controversy or like myth around that. And that started around 3,000 years ago or so when the emperors would hire these feng shui practitioners to, initially it started with trying to figure out where they should bury their dead. What's the best situation earth-wise that, is conducive to that. And then they noticed that this could apply to their homes. So the emperors would have these feng shui practitioners design their palaces and their spaces. And it was a very secretive practice. If you were a layperson or someone outside of royalty, you were not allowed to practice feng shui. You had no access to it. It was very high and these very exclusive. And people would be killed if they were to share the knowledge and this information with others. Reiki, that came out in, I think it was around 1924, 1920s. So that was another practice where Usui went up and received this information on how to use Reiki. And then there's also like human design, and that's a whole nother aspect using astrology. And I might influence some of that human design into my practices as well. And it's the same thing with like zodiac signs, just knowing where they are in their practices. But I mean, this is stuff that goes back and if these are things that don't resonate, like I invite you to just kind of put them to the side and, go with what things do. There's so much history and you can just go dive down like all these portals. Same thing with tarots. There's histories in Italy and France and different ways of thinking and different, philosophies. So it's kind of like connecting with those ones that resonate, and if they feel right, using that in the design influence.
Sure. And I'm curious to know, not even just talking about the pandemic, but over time, over the course of your career, you're just one person, but you have a large sphere of influence. Have you noticed, like in terms of people's at least in the spaces you work with, people's openness, people's attentiveness to spirituality has changed over time? Like, is that something that maybe you can have conversations with other people who work in your space, like other people, like have you guys kind of noticed like over time, like people's responsiveness and openness like changing, or is it sort of stayed the same as it always was?
No, I mean, I think people might have already had this kind of in the back of their head. I get comments all the time from other interior designers from all over the world saying, I'm so glad you're doing this podcast. I never hear about this. You know, I've been practicing tarot for years. I don't necessarily use it directly in my influence, but I do use that, and it is part of me as a person. So I just hear people kind of coming out, telling me what they're doing, but still being really afraid to come out of the closet of being a spiritual person or practicing tarot or any of those things. So they're just like, I'm really glad that you get to be the face of it. And I'm like, I'm going to be out and I'm going to share all these things. And it's been cool. There's been some just really eye-opening things with people, like I said, just coming out and telling me what they're doing, but not sharing it with out in the public. And then also like with all of my members that are in the group, we have a little over 60 worldwide, just them connecting with me because of the spiritual aspect.
Sure. Do you, as far as like sort of going forward, I mean, do you want to sort of expand the work you do in a specific way in terms of maybe you can tell us a bit about new projects or sort of new collaborations with other artists that you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm currently working with Bivouac Ciderworks right now in North Park. That does have this spiritual influence. And when I was speaking with with my clients, they'll tell me that they specifically hire me because I can hold that space for them on an emotional level. As they're going through transitions, like I said before, being able to just be there for them, just having a nurturing sort of element, a grounding vibe to help center them. A lot of times my clients might just be kind of, I wouldn't say chaotic, but just kind of everywhere, kind of floating, not really knowing what direction to take things. So to have somebody to kind of just hold that and to anchor it for them has been a part of that. Same thing with like artists. Like I really connect with all the artists that are here in San Diego. I have a deep connection with them. I know them personally. I know their spouses. I know their children. I know their stories. So for me, that also kind of helps connect them with a different client because I know I can, like personality-wise might, work, design-wise might work with their art and what the client is wanting to bring into their space. So all of that is very collaborative with who I bring into my spaces. And I also work with a lot of local furniture makers, people that are making actual furniture, knowing their story. San Diego Urban Timber is here in San Diego, and they basically take trees that have to be cut down. So they had to cut down a tree in Coronado at the children's park because the heart of it was dead. And we transformed that into a beautiful 12-foot dining table in a client's home. So giving new life in that way. So I'm connecting these local businesses that are doing really beautiful, rad things for our planet and for design, and connecting them with the clients that will find that very meaningful and wanting to bring that into their homes.
Absolutely. And one thing I wanted to make an observation, this is just my personal observation, is I hear a lot of people talking about how modern art is sort of stagnated, or, modern art is dead, or, we're kind of, sort of looking back at the past and the history of art, from the Renaissance on to the present, we're not in the best era for art. But can you sort of call attention to maybe some of the positive trends you're seeing in art in terms of locally, maybe some of the, the good art that is happening, and some of the artists that, deserve to be called out?
Yeah. So I mentioned it before with Carly Ely and the ritual boxes, but her and Chris Konecki, her partner, are doing amazing, beautiful murals all over San Diego. They do a lot of street spray art, and not just here in San Diego, but throughout the States. I live in Leucadia, so we just got a Taylor Chapin mural up at the Leucadia Donut. So even just in Leucadia, there's murals going up all over the place, being able to just honor these spaces and bringing art into everything. I mean, I'm just seeing it these explosions of art that's happening. There's so many openings and gallery openings and museum events where they're celebrating artists. We just did a talk at Madison Gallery and Solana Beach last week, with the founder and Jen Findley, who is an art curator. So bringing her on board with designers that want to access art but don't know how to do it. So bringing on collaborative efforts through galleries and through people that are actual curators to bring this level into a client's home. So there's so many beautiful things that are happening, and it's just really about sharing. And I try to do that. I created a new Instagram called Art Scene San Diego, or Art Scene SD, to share what's happening and when it's happening, because there's no central place in San Diego, which is really weird, where you can go and be like, okay, what's happening this week, or what art opening is going on, or who's a local artist in San Diego. So trying to highlight that, because there's so much going on.
Sure, and that's that's why I want to do things like this, is like because the reality is that there are tons of hardworking artists out there who deserve to have their work called attention to, and I see it myself, but I feel like not everyone always does, and there's sort of, again, this perception that that there's sort of a lack in innovation in the art scene. But I also wanted to give you a chance to talk before we close just a bit about just some of the clients you've worked with in terms of testimonials from people who have been to your workshops, that you've worked with one-on-one, people whose spaces and lives have really been transformed by your work. I just want to give you a chance to sort of talk about some of those success stories, if any spring to mind.
Yeah, so recently I've had a recent divorcee, separate from her husband, her and her daughter. Her daughter's, going back and forth in 2 different spaces. So really reclaiming a space or an existing space. I have clients where, they were in a relationship that might be toxic, or just, they've outgrown it. So for her, it was really about reclaiming a new space and empowering her. So she moved into a space that was much smaller. The ceilings were low. She just felt super kind of depressed and sad in the space, and bringing me in really opened a lot of the energy. We did clearings and that kind of thing as well, but choosing materials and fabrics and knowing what she wanted, just bringing in life into the space. And the other thing too is like bringing in plants and natural elements to really get us reconnected with nature. So after that, she was just like, oh my gosh, like this space is completely different. She feels good. She feels inspired. Her daughter feels good. She feels secure in this space. So, and same thing with another client that I had in Point Loma. He was also going through separation and wanted to create sacred space for his kids and want them to feel supported and secure and motivated. So doing a full remodel in there too. It's just transforming spaces that help us with our mental health, just the wellness, and just feeling uplifted and excited that they want to stay in the space and live their lives in there, and invite people over, and being able to also entertain and have that in their lifestyle.
Yeah. Maybe one more success story.
So the one we were talking about in Leucadia, like for her, like that space, when she first got to that space, we did a full tear down and new build. But she really felt like that wasn't her space, like she was an intruder, or that she couldn't, she always thought she wasn't gonna live there. So we did like land healing ceremonies up there, connected her with the actual land. We created a ceremony where she brought like her photo albums, and we created a Karen, or like an offering where she brought her favorite wine, and she introduced herself and her family. And we looked at the photo albums, and also introduced myself and like what we were gonna pour back into the land. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So we did that, and then we did the crystal grid and clearings, and now she's living this space and she feels like she's deserving. Where before it was just like, oh my God, I'm a stranger. I don't deserve this. I'm never gonna live here. And now she's, glowing and just excelling in the space and feeling good about being on that property and being the caregiver of that land. There's ancient, orchards. There's an old avocado orchard up there, and old trees, and she really wanted to honor them and let them know that she was going to be a caregiver for them. So that was really cool for her to be able to connect on that level.
Absolutely. And then finally, before I let you go, is one thing that I was communicated to me is that there is some upcoming events that you wanted to talk about a bit, I believe in September.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So with the Design Coven, We do virtual events every month for those that are not here in San Diego as well as in San Diego. So we'll do group coaching. So that's where they have access to me to get interior design business information on how to run their business, or if they come across a certain situation on a job site or a floor plan. So we'll do hot seat coaching. We set intentions. We do product training. So I'll bring on like a sustainable line to learn from, understand how they operate business-wise. And then we'll do a studio tour. So we'll do a tour of a local artist. One that's coming up is we're collaborating with Sparks Gallery downtown and Stephanie Bales. So she's a local artist here in San Diego. So we'll do an artist talk there, discovering Stephanie, understanding what Sparks is doing, really getting immersed in that space. We're doing a showroom tour with Fisher Packle in San Marcos, which is a kitchen appliance showroom. So we're actually gonna go up to Stone Systems, which is here locally. Stone Systems is our host. They're gonna serve breakfast, and then we all take a shuttle to Fisher Packle, and we're going to learn from a chef. They have a professional chef that's on staff, and they're basically gonna like cook for us and show us how to operate and use all the appliances so that we get really familiar firsthand experience to be able to share that with the clients, and then they're gonna shuttle us back after lunch. And so it's just like experiences like that we get hands-on, we get to know the manufacturer, we know the showroom, we know like all the people that are involved, so that when I speak to somebody, especially when I'm trying to, bid a job, I can be like, okay, we're gonna use Stone Systems, Angela's amazing, or we're gonna use BDG and Larry's gonna, so it's like I have these connections. Yeah, and that's also part of what you're getting as a designer, is you're getting my 20 years of connections and relationships that I've built this whole time, so that if something does go wrong, because something will go wrong, it always does, I can literally text any one of those people and they will have a solution for me that day.
It's not just like a disembodied referral of like,
or like you're like on, on the phone with like customer service. Like,
not like that. Which I'm sure your clients appreciate.
Absolutely. And when they come in with me, like when we go shopping, they know who I am. They take extra care of them. They, it's really a really cool process to be able to share those relationships with the clients.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to keep you, but I wanted to just say that the thing is that for people who weren't familiar with your work or with the space you do, I feel like, this is a really good sell, to be honest, because I think that there's a lot of people who like just don't think about their spaces at all. I think like a lot of us just go through life sort of just, this is my house, this is where I live, this is where I come back to, this is where I go point A to point B, but like just sort of the intentionality there is refreshing and something that I can tell you take very seriously. So keep doing your work.
Thank you.
But in the meantime, one last thing is you have a website. Do you want to give us a quick shout out?
So you can find my work at Tiger Veil, and that's TIGERVEIL.com. So and that's also kind of a different name for interiors. A lot of times you'll see someone's name followed by design or interiors or whatever. I was really intentional about that name as well. So for me, the Tiger is really about empowerment and reclaiming and being fierce. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I created that in the year of the water tiger, which was last year.
Okay.
And then the veil corresponds to both like fabric and a veil of fabric, but also the veil of spirituality, the veil of energy connection in that space. You can find me on Instagram, on my personal Instagram, Rachel Lorraine, with an A. I pull cards there. I'll pull cards for people I just pulled cards yesterday. Tiger Veil on Instagram is where I'll have more of my interior design inspiration and that kind of thing.
Okay, awesome. Well, Rachel, thanks so much for coming on today. Not just, obviously it's been great getting to know you, but also I think that there's a lot of positive, you talked about some of the success stories, but a lot of positive impact that your group is doing in the San Diego area. And again, drawing attention to the fact that there are great artists, great designers out here. It's not we're not in this sort of declining phase of.
No.
But it's sort of like actually there's people who are really talented whose work we want to draw attention to. So I appreciate you highlighting some of that for us today. And let's do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Nice talking to you.
Take care.
Thank you. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Dorado Nutrition at doradonutrition.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.